Greetings all, Marty out here with a word from the Word, hoping to encourage you. So one of my most favorite stories in the Old Testament that we've been covering in Bible study here is 1 Samuel 14. It's talking about, Jonathan, King Saul's son. Now, Jonathan has such a bright, shining moment here that we're going to read about. He is a great, great biblical hero in this story that I'm going to share with you. And he's seen his dad, Saul, be the first king of Israel, disobey God. First it started out well, and then he disobeyed God. And in the meantime, secretly, David, the shepherd boy, was anointed king by Samuel the prophet secretly. But so he's back taking care of his sheep. He doesn't start reigning. He goes back to his sheep. It's his father's sheep. And so Jonathan is with his father, and this is before David kills Goliath and all. So David's not even in the scene. But King Saul, he's a guy that is not a man of faith. He's a guy that image is everything. And power and control, very important. But image is everything. And he pretends, he's a pretender. He pretends to be a spiritual guy. And he doesn't do it very well because he's not. But this is a story, again, now, so that's where Jonathan comes from. He sees his dad. He knows who Samuel the prophet is. He knows the word of God. Somehow that's been ingrained into him. Honor thy mother and thy father. I'm sure that was ingrained into him. We won't get into that today, but let's just start right there in 1 Samuel chapter 14. This is about Jonathan. Now, the enemies of Israel at that time, they had a lot of enemies, but at this time in their history, it was the Philistines, lived sort of on the west coast over by the Mediterranean Sea, and Israel governed, reigned over by King Saul, and the Philistines are at war. So chapter 14 of 1 Samuel, verse 1. One day Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come on, let's go over where the Philistines have their outpost," because they're like the Philistines on one side of this valley, the Israelites on the other side, and they're facing each other. And they're waiting for something to happen. Somebody make the first move. So he says, let's go over to his armor bearer. Let's go over where the Philistines are at their outpost, and we'll attack them. And Jonathan did not tell his father what he was doing. Meanwhile, Saul and his 600 men, it's not very many men, they're in a very high place, very, very well situated in safety. Saul and his 600 men were camped out on the outskirts of Gibeah around the pomegranate tree Migron. Among Saul's men were Ahijah, the priest, who was wearing the ephod. That's how they inquired of God in those days, was the ephod, and the priestly vest. And Ahijah was the son of Ichabod's brother Ahitub, the son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord, who had served Shiloh. Now, no one realized that Jonathan had left the Israelite camp. To reach the Philistine outpost, Jonathan had to go down between two rocky cliffs where that were called Bozez and Seneh. The cliff on the north was in front of Michmash, and the one on the south was in front of Gibeah. I read that to let you know that King Saul was up on some high cliffs in a very safe place. Jonathan had to climb down these cliffs, and his armor bearer. Now, I want you to get the picture. Jonathan tells his armor bearer, "Hey, why don't the two of us go take on the Philistine army?" Two guys going to take on an army? Are you serious? Let's see. I'm trying to find that. Let me go down. Okay, here it is. So again, we take up to Jonathan after all that discussion. In verse 6, Jonathan says, let's go across to the outpost. He tells his armor bearer again, let's go across the outpost to those pagans Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Perhaps the Lord will help us, for nothing can hinder the Lord. He can win a battle, whether he has many warriors or only a few." Two guys, Jonathan and his armor bearer, are going to take on the entire Philistine army. Let me read a little more. So verse 7, the armor bearer says, "Do what you think is best," the armor bearer replied. "I'm with you completely, whatever you decide." The armor bearer says, "I'm in." He says, "I'm in with you." He says, "I'm all in with you. Whatever you do, I'm in." You have to stop and think about, what are these guys thinking? Where did this come from? Jonathan was a man of faith, and he knew the Lord. I mean, he'd been taught as a kid, the law, and he had seen Samuel, anoint he didn't see Samuel anoint his father, but he knew that Samuel anointed his father, and he was the priest, and they had the tabernacle, the tent of meeting and all. So, in other words, Jonathan didn't read this in an article. He didn't read it in a Bible commentary. He didn't read this part about, perhaps the Lord will help us, for nothing can hinder the Lord. He can win a battle, whether he has many warriors or only a few. Where did he get that? Well, I think his recent history was actually from just before 1 Samuel, where the first king, Saul, he's the first king. Before that, they had judges. And the Israelites would sin and drift away from God and get in bondage with other enemies. And then they would cry out to God. Then God would send them a deliverer. Gideon is the one that comes to my mind right now, because it's the same thing. It gives similar circumstances. Gideon and 300 men, were used by God to set to turn the enemy, to turn the tide of a battle. Actually, they won the battle with 300 guys, and they started out with like 30,000, got down to 300, and so I'm sure that Jonathan knew that story, and somehow he felt inspired, and boldness inspires boldness. Courage inspires courage. And so his armor bearer could see that Jonathan, this was something from the Lord. And he knew that Jonathan knew the Lord. He knew that Jonathan had this word from the Lord. He knew that Jonathan was he was following the Lord and he couldn't lose. So that's the faith of that's just not the faith of Jonathan, but the faith of the armor bearer. He's saying, now, the faith of the armor bearer, he's not the one that stood up and said, "Hey, Jonathan, why don't we go and take on the Philistines?" It was the faith of Jonathan, but what I'm saying is the armor bearer could see that. He sensed that Jonathan had this faith, and it was real. He was not a pretender. And the armor bearer, he saw that. He knew Jonathan well enough to know this is real. And so he says, "I'm all in with you. I am all in. Whatever you want to do, I'm all in with you." Because he knew that Jonathan knew what he was doing. So let's read the rest of the story quickly. So verse 8 again. "All right then," Jonathan told him, "we'll cross over and let them see us. We'll let the Philistines see us. If they say to us, 'Stay where you are or we'll kill you,' then we'll stop and not go up. We won't do this. But if they say, 'Come on up and fight,' then we will go up. That will be the Lord's sign that he will help us defeat them." So when the Philistines saw them coming, they shouted, "Hey, look, the Hebrews are crawling out of their holes like rats, like scared little cats." So the men from the outpost shouted to Jonathan, "Come on up here and we'll teach you a lesson." So Jonathan says, "Come on, climb right behind me," Jonathan said to the armor bearer, "for the Lord will help us defeat them." He knew that was a signal, and he's telling his armor bearer, "Let's go." So they climbed up using both hands and feet. And the Philistines, so they're climbing up a mountain to get to the enemy. There are tremendous, get this, tremendous, insurmountable hindrance, disadvantage. They're way down the hill, and they've got to climb with their feet and their hands, all fours, to get up this hill, to get to the enemy. This doesn't make any sense. I mean, the enemy can like roll boulders down on them, throw, shoot arrows going straight down, and, throw spears. You ever try to throw a spear up a hill? They're climbing. And so they're at a huge, insurmountable disadvantage. And so he says, so they climbed up using both hands and feet and got to the Philistines, and the Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed those who came behind them. They killed some 20 men in all, and their bodies were scattered over about a half an acre. God is going before them, and they're taking out the Philistines. Two guys versus, the Philistine army. So guess what happens? Suddenly, how'd that happen? Suddenly, panic broke out in the Philistines. How'd that happen? Okay, let me read this, and we'll give a little more comment. Suddenly, panic broke out in the Philistine army, both the camp and in the field, including even the outpost and the raiding parties. All of them, all the Philistines army. And then an earthquake struck, and everyone was terrified. Now, if you read the rest of this, it goes well. So, Jonathan and his armor bearer are killing these Philistines, and then panic happens on the Philistines, and then an earthquake, happens, and then they're all screaming in fear. Fear of what? Not just Jonathan and his armor bearer, but in fear of God. They know this is from God. And so they start running. And then, I'm going to make this a long story short, then all the other, I think I can read it down here. Oh, yeah, there's two other camps. There was a terrible confusion everywhere. Even the Hebrews, the Jews, who had previously gone over to the Philistine army. Some of them said, we're going to get creamed. Here we are, we got Saul, this chicken leader, he's yellow-bellied, here's our king, and we've got these Philistines, this mighty fighting machine right in front of us, and some of these Hebrews said, you know what, we're good soldiers, but who's behind us? Who's got our backs? You think Saul's got our backs? He's a nut. This is bad. So, Bud talks to Joe. Hey, Joe, we need to get out of here. We need to go, and we'll join the Philistines. Look, we're good soldiers. They'll take us. We need to go and fight with them against the Hebrews, against the Jews, because otherwise we're going to get creamed. We're going to get dead. We're going to end up dead in this battle. So Joe says to Bud, yeah, let's go. So then, let's see, I think, so then after this panic-stricken army starts to run, then even the Hebrews, they know what's going on. They know where this panic came from. They know where the earthquake came from. They know how Jonathan is killing all these soldiers. The Hebrews had previously gone over to the Philistine army, revolted and joined with Saul and Jonathan and the rest of Israelites. Likewise, get this is verse 22, this is incredible. Likewise, the men of Israel who were hiding, CYA, they were hiding. They were hiding in the hill country of Ephraim. All of a sudden, they got, emboldened, grew some backbone, and they joined the chase when they saw the Philistines running away. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle continued to rage even beyond, and so on. Big victory for two guys that were willing to take on the army. So the point is, the same thing. Now listen, a quick story. A few chapters later, I think it's chapter 17, David enters the scene as just a shepherd boy. And then he takes a gift of some food and stuff to his brothers that are in the army. And then David hears Goliath, because now the Philistines and the Israelites are all lined up again across this valley. And Goliath comes marching out and starts challenging these guys. Hey, send me a man to fight, And so then every time he comes out to challenge the Israeli armies, all the Israelites, all these warriors, quote unquote warriors from Israelites, they just scatter every time Goliath comes out and challenges them. Send me a man to fight. They scatter. Then David comes along and he hears this. He says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine, this dog that's insulting the armies of God? What is, And so they say, well, nobody's going to fight him. It's a fight between two men, Goliath and whoever will go fight him. And, the guy that should have gone to fight him would have been Saul, Chicken King Saul. And he wasn't going to go. Now, Jonathan didn't go because he wasn't. See, God didn't call him to go do that. God called David. So David shows up and says, I'll take care of the giant. Okay? As they're approaching each other, Goliath is like saying, I'm going to feed you to the birds. I'm going to cut you up. And David says, you come to me with a javelin, a spear, and a sword. And I come to you, not with a sling, not with my impressive prowess, that I've killed lions and bears, with my little sling. He says, I come to you in the name of the Lord. And he runs towards him, puts out a pole, puts a stone in his sling and gets Goliath right between the eyes, cuts his head off. And then, same thing happens. All of these scaredy cat, Israelites come pouring out from behind the rocks and from out of the cracks in the earth and behind the weeds and bushes. They come pouring out and start chasing the Philistines because they're all running. Boldness begets boldness. Courage begets courage. Now, when things get down and maybe you don't feel like you're winning, you feel like you're losing and things aren't going that well, David's life is a great, great picture to study that in 1 Samuel. And just this message that when things get down, but you have a clear vision of what you're supposed to do, and maybe you're supposed to be a hero, maybe you're supposed to stand up, maybe you're supposed to say something, maybe you're supposed to lead a charge, maybe you're the armor bearer that says, you know what, I'm with you, I'm all in with you because I know that you know where you're going, and I know the Lord's behind you. I'm just saying that, even when things look dark, don't be discouraged. Don't give up. And don't be a coward. Be bold. Be strong. Those disciples in the first century, the Lord's disciples after he was gone to heaven, they turned in from arguing, common, working guys about, arguing about who's going to be greatest in heaven and being afraid of the Jews, that they might get crucified just like Jesus. They were changed. And they became bold as lions, unstoppable. They told their religious leaders, well, now, is it better to obey God or you? You figure that out. They were unstoppable. So just an encouragement for all of us. You go through this election season, and elections are not really thermometers. I'm sorry, they're not really thermostats. The thermostat controls the temperature in your house, in your car, in your oven. But a thermometer just checks the temperature, tells you what it is. So elections are kind of like thermometers, not thermostats. They don't really control that much. I know there's elections have consequences. I know that. But it kind of tells you where everybody is with a thermometer. You know what? Don't get discouraged and don't rely on those things. You forget what you feel and stick and believe what is real, and that you follow the Lord Jesus Christ and you follow him fearlessly, and don't let anybody, discourage you, bring you down. I mean, we have down spots sometimes, and yes, but just remember what's true. The Bible is true. You can always count on the Lord. You can always trust the Lord. And if he wants you to do something bold, don't chicken out. Guess what? When you do this, do Do you think that that earthquake would have happened if Jonathan didn't obey the Lord? Are you kidding? See, when Jonathan took his place and he did what he could do, taking on those two guys, taking on the Philistine army, he did what he could do. Then the Lord sends panic. Then the Lord sends an earthquake. He did only what he could do. Jonathan couldn't make an earthquake, but God could. When he sees Jonathan obeying him and this armor bearer risking their lives, they're giving it all. God steps in, does a miracle. So just encourage you all that we have nothing to lose, all to gain. God bless you all.